Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Alexandra Steinacker-Clark. For those of you who don't know me, I am an art historian, a podcaster, and I'm the author of this book right here called Working in Art: How to Build a Career in the Art World. And tonight, I have the real pleasure of sitting down with artist Lisa Corinne Davis, who has painted the amazing works that are surrounding us tonight. I hope that this will be a really illuminating conversation about what it actually means to build a life and a career in the art world, because God knows it is quite complicated. And it means a great deal to, I think, both of us to have you here tonight to, kind of celebrate the fact that this is a recently launched book, but also to celebrate Lisa's exhibition opening, which is happening right after this event. So you guys are getting kind of a first look at these works. As I said, just like the brief intro to me, I'm an art historian. I have an art history background. I worked in the commercial art world. And my podcast that I founded 5 years ago is done with the aim of demystifying the professional art sector. Within that vein, I then wrote this book. So this book is about what it means to build a career in the arts, and I interviewed many different people about what that can look like. And that is going to be the framework of the discussion that I'm having tonight with Lisa. So, Lisa, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing your evening with me.
Thank you.
To start us off, could you briefly introduce yourself and also just give us a little bit of an introduction to your work and your practice before I start to ask you about your career?
Okay. Well, first I want to thank you for wanting to have this conversation, and thanks to James Mayer and Christine and Stephen and Amy, who have been lovely in organizing the exhibition and this talk. So thank you to the gallery. I am a painter, an oil painter, living in Brooklyn, New York, the USA. Sorry about that. And I grew up as a Black woman with light skin, and first grew up in a Black neighborhood. Then my mother moved us to an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. I went to a white private school. So I've been navigating spaces and places based on codes of how behaviors happen in different places. So the works I make are loosely based on that lived experience. They are suggestive of maps or spaces, but they are not fixed. I want people to navigate through them, to readjust where they are, what they're looking at, what they think they are, have their own associations and be aware that those associations are coming from your experience more and your interpretations, and less about what is in the actual paintings, but suggested in the paintings. And I think of this as a parallel to race and race labels. Like you can say you're Black or Chinese or whatever. It tells you nothing. It's a very firm term, but the real navigation of a person is through many nuances and facts about them that takes a while to unfold and unravel. And I also hope that that happens in the work, that it takes time for you to see different things and for things to unravel a bit.
Yeah. And I think, when we're talking about these different things, these different layers that appear in your work, I think that is quite a wonderful parallel to actually how your work and life is responding or is I guess, intertwined with your practice and how that sort of manifests. Because you're an artist, you're also a professor,
Correct.
You run a studio, you're a mother.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about that particular combination. How does it feel for that to come together? And how does that feel to juggle these things in today's world as a practicing artist?
Yeah, I think any artist is juggling a lot, period. You can't, maybe there's 10 artists that don't have to have other jobs, but I'm not one of them. And I think the most aligned profession with making art is teaching, because you get to first off learn about other generations as you go on. Like there's the conversation goes past what you know in your time of making work into younger people, and you get to prompt them with things that matter to you. So I can be in the studio thinking about something, and I get this privilege of going to the classroom and bouncing that ball into a group of students for to hear a discussion around that topic.
Do you feel like having that engagement with the students also sort of shapes your practice?
Oh, absolutely. And it's if it's working well, it doesn't always work perfectly, but when it's working well, there's a reciprocal aspect to what I give and what I get. And it's a wonderful extended conversation about what matters, principles, histories, popular culture, etc.
Yeah. And what does that involve when you do you feel like sometimes you might have to separate what you bring into the academic sphere versus what you bring in the studio?
What do you mean?
Sort of the things that you research or look at or teach within your academic profession versus what you're bringing into the studio and what you bring into your work. Do you feel like sometimes you don't want the two to intersect? Do you feel like you might have to watch out for that? Or do you welcome that and work with it together?
I don't want to bring the problems into the studio because students are problematic sometimes. But I don't feel that the things we talk about and the issues that come into the classroom should stay out of the studio. I think it's important to keep me engaged and progressing as a painter and not stilted. In a way. Yeah.
So actually having that like second line of work and the things that you do, they're very much intertwined and relational to one another and impact one another in positive ways.
Absolutely. Right.
And I would love to ask you, because you have taken on public art commissions, and I think that is such an amazing thing, but that's another string to your bow. Right. That's a whole nother way to think about your practice, about how the public will interact with your practice. It's very different to working in a studio and thinking about an artwork on canvas, right? So can you walk me through what that process was actually like also on a practical level, like what it is like to plan something like that? You know, how does a commission come about? What did the brief look like? How did you sort of navigate the fact that this work is going to be existing in the public realm?
Right. So in New York, the subway system has a huge public project, artist commissioned aspect to it. And there's a little secrecy around how it actually works.
I think with anything in the art world, it's sometimes quite elusive.
Yeah. So I got a random email once to make a proposal for a station in a particular community. The difference is, right there, is they're asking you to respond to the community. So when I'm making paintings as a studio painter, I'm not responding to a community. I'm responding to my own thinking. So you have to kind of think about the community that you're working with. You make a proposal based on, they give you a site, they give you community information, and then you do a mock-up, and then you sit down in front of a bunch of professionals, anywhere from a city representative to a museum curator, and then you either get it or don't.
Oh, so you were invited to basically pitch.
Right.
So you're invited, and then you do the work to come up with a concept and everything,
Correct.
and then you pitch it, and then you get told if you got it or not.
Right. So I did not get it, to be truthful, 2 out of the 3 times. So I got a pitch once, did not get it, pitched again, did not get it. And finally, Hunter College Station, which is where I teach, is where I actually got the commission. And because I was a grad student at Hunter College and I teach there, I know that station really well. I know what happens there. So I understood the kind of movements and generated energy that happens there, and was able to do 3 locations. But the other difference is, once you submit an image, it's a computer-generated image, right, of a painting.
It's a mock-up, basically.
It's a mock-up,
like,
right?
Yeah.
And you're handing that off to a fabricator, and you have to trust that this person can translate that into what you want it to be, right? It's not a painting anymore; it's glass mosaic. So there's big pieces and small pieces, and shiny pieces, and textured pieces. And the man that did it, the company that did it, was in Munich, Germany. And he's so good at it that he was able to make the translation. So letting go of control, really hard for a studio painter, So, and I didn't really see it done till it was installed.
Yeah.
So that was
Imagine walking up to it and you're like, no.
Yeah.
But I think thinking about that process, this is exactly also what this book is about and why I wanted to write something like this. I didn't include fabricators in the book, just because there wasn't enough space, but I included, for example, art framers, art technicians, people who work physically with the art, which I think is really important. I've done podcast episodes with mount makers. If anyone knows what a mount maker does, they do all the invisible work at a museum or a gallery. Their job is to be invisible, is to make you not see the mount and only see the work. And then thinking about fabricators, thinking about how many artists work with fabricators, and people don't always understand that process and what goes on behind the scenes.
Correct, yeah.
And it's so interesting to see that and see how that will come together and create something. And it's also an interesting lesson in, the fact that you basically didn't get the commission 2 out of the 3 times.
Yeah.
Do you think that because you really knew the area well the 3rd time around, that was really what got it? Or
the comedy of it is the first 2 I got these random emails congratulations, you're a finalist. And the first one, I think you've got the wrong Lisa Corinne Davis. I never applied for anything. And they said, we have a secret list. So I thought, okay. The 3rd one, I saw the request for proposal for Hunter College, and because it mattered so much to me, and I had a contact at the Metropolitan Transit Authority, I said, oh, can I do this? And she said, oh no, you have to apply. So it was all of a sudden I had to apply with the others. So, I hope so. I hope that because I knew it well and it made sense, but I don't know what happened behind closed doors, obviously.
That is another thing, and just being transparent about how the art world works sometimes. Sometimes it is, there are conversations going on that we don't see, and that just is how it works. And so not taking it personally, not taking that rejection as if it says anything about you or the quality of your work. And I think as an artist, you probably have to do a lot of that. You have to be really fortified in how how the world receives your work.
Yeah, no, for years, this might have been perverse, I kept when things were still on paper, a file of rejection letters.
You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to do the opposite. You're supposed to take all the positive things.
I had this big file and every time I just put it in the file, and people said, I don't know if that's healthy, Lisa, but I thought, but then when I got my first grant, I just spread them on the floor and danced on top of them, and that was it. It was my ritual in dealing with rejection, so.
That's a really, really wonderful way to deal with rejection. I think that for me, I like to write down all of the things that I've done in my life that I think I've accomplishments that I've had and things that have gone really well. And then that is something that I look at whenever I get a rejection, because it helps turn my mindset around and makes me frame things more positively. But honestly, sometimes it's fine to just wallow in self-pity for a day if you get rejected.
Good at that.
Yeah. And I also want to talk to you about running a studio, because let's talk about the behind the scenes of the creation of these amazing works.
Yeah.
You run a studio, you have an assistant. I think a lot of people in the art world, I also have an interview with a studio manager in the book. And I think that it's interesting to talk about what running a studio, what running a business like that actually looks like on the day-to-day. And what did you have to learn when you were doing that, and as you're doing that, what sort of lessons have you learned along the way, maybe even the hard way?
Yeah, well, I have 2 assistants, to be clear. I have someone that deals with paperwork, consignment forms, keeps track of all that, and she works mostly remotely. So, but she's organized and can focus on that. And then I have someone that comes only 1 day a week in the studio, and the work is developed as a conversation. So earlier I was talking about the work with James, and they're not drawn first, they're not computerized, they are something put something down and then I respond to it. And because it doesn't matter what gets put down first, that's when my assistant works. So she will do an initial layer of taping, so random triangles. And I'll say, just make some triangles, get them smaller to bigger, and she spends a lot of time taping away. And then then I start painting and responding to what that suggests and try to continue the conversation within the work. So I have a person untaping and taping primarily, sometimes picking up packages, etc. I don't like having someone in the studio, obviously. I mean, not obviously, personally. And, but this certainly keeps the making activity faster because the taping part takes a lot of time.
Yeah. And why is it difficult for you to have someone in the studio? Do you want to have just kind of your space?
Yeah,
it's a personal space, isn't it? It really is.
I mean, I don't know any artists, even artists that have studio assistants every day or multiple assistants that like having them there. But at a certain point, when you have to produce a certain amount of work, it's unavoidable to have help.
Yeah, of course. Even stretching canvases, things like that.
Exactly.
Priming
things, yeah.
Yeah, that's all part of it. Yeah. This is my penultimate question, and so if anyone is thinking about asking a question later, I will open the floor up so that we can have a conversation with you guys as well. But working in art, this book talks a lot about the professional structures that underpin creative careers. Looking at things that nobody teaches you, but eventually we all kind of have to figure it out. And I'm kind of trying to hopefully teach people before they have to figure it out. So thinking back to earlier in your career, what's one thing that you wish someone had told you about being an artist?
Wow. One thing. I think the most important thing is, artists want to show their work and they want to sell their work, baseline. But not every gallery or sales relationship is a healthy one or a good one. And so I think I wish I had known to do my research better, know who the art dealer is, what their history is. Have they ever taken an art course? Shocker, many have not. Is that important to you? Are they alive? I mean, their personality, and you're joining a relationship with them that's, communicative, but also financial. And so you have to trust them, and you have to be clear about that this is someone that's going to make you feel okay, support what you do, not try to make you do what you don't do. And just be supportive in a way. So I think when most of my students get out of grad school, they're like, I need a gallery, I need a gallery, I need a gallery. And they sometimes go for these galleries and no, not that gallery. Yeah. Did you not read in the press that they just stopped paying their artists, And so, so that's a really important thing to understand. This is a really important relationship that sustains you on so many levels, and it has to be a trusted one, and an honest one.
Yeah, I think I was speaking to Sigrid Kirk, who runs the Association of Women in the Arts here in London yesterday, and we were in conversation with each other, but then an artist asked a question from the audience, and they said, how do you approach a gallery? And I was like, oh, well, you can do this and this and this, and these are the steps. And Sigrid was like, but also, do you need a gallery? Is that what you need right now? When you're young and when you're entering into the art world, it does feel like that would be a really big sign of security. But nowadays, not necessarily. Right. And there are alternative ways to be doing things. I do really love, the fact that when it's a good relationship, it's really, really good. Yeah. It feels really symbiotic, really harmonious, and that is something really special. But as you said, reiterating your point about you have to do your research with it. You have to know what the gallery is about, what sort of exhibitions they show, how they contextualize their artists, how they support their artists.
Right, exactly.
That's all really important.
It's very important.
And my final question to you before we open up for questions, I want to bring it back to your work. I want to talk more about, the space we're sitting in, what we're looking at. What is one thing or maybe one work or one concept about your works here that you would like to leave us with if we're going to be sitting and looking at your works for a long period of time? What do you want us to take from that?
I guess to go back to something I said before, that the work is conversational, like a relationship with a person. You can notice similar elements in the paintings, but they don't look the same. There's a vocabulary, and that vocabulary gets mixed up based on what occurred before, and I don't know where any painting's going to go, and I don't know when it's going to end. And I hope there's a sense of openness to it, and that they're not shut, but they're still open and breathing. So that's what I hope from the work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd love to open up the floor to questions if anyone has one. An intimidating microphone.
Okay.
Hi. Lisa, I don't know when exactly you first started seriously making work and selling work, but I wondered if you've noticed a big difference in the world since then, the art world since then, and you since then. How have you changed since then?
Yeah. What was the first part of that question?
Just since you first started.
Yeah.
Like when did you start?
Yeah. I mean, I've always made art. I was one of those kids in school that felt different, so I always made art. And I studied it through and through, and I was in love with it. I went to museums early. But the main difference, and I was just talking about this, is the economics. You used to be able to find some wacky place in New York in some semi-dangerous neighborhood with your friends and throw some money at it and paint or make whatever.
You could be really scrappy with it.
Really scrappy. Yeah. It didn't matter what you made because the consequences of the economics you could afford, right? There's an article going around in the US right now where that's not true anymore. You can't, my graduate students can't afford studios right now. And so they are really conscious of making money. How do you toggle as little time at a job and as much time in your studio? And that is a harder balance at this point for them. And it makes the thesis of this article is it possible anymore for people to make work that's free, adventurous, might do something, and not commercial, sellable, etc. So that's, to me, the main change that's happened. And I think it's unfortunate because even in New York, there's no far borough or cave-like living that you can find. It's all expensive, It's just all super expensive.
Yeah, in a big city like London as well.
Sure.
We feel those parallels, and a lot of people move outside of the city, or they move to. A lot of people are international, and they end up going back to their home countries where the quality of life is higher and the cost of living is lower. If you want to practice art and be creative and have that space, because I think it's so difficult to be able to have the headspace to tap into your creativity and to tap into that mindset to allow yourself to kind of let go and create something because you're so busy trying to make a living.
Yeah,
right?
London, think about popular music here. Could that happen anymore? All the great bands that have come out of a place like London. I don't know, you can't just make it up as you go. You gotta plan and strategize and, I don't know, have wealthy parents.
That's always a help, isn't it?
That's good. That works.
Thank you so much to both of you for such a fascinating and honest conversation.
Okay.
And the question about economics made me also think about the networks.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the useful networks that got you started, and what are some of the useful networks you have entertained and nourished since?
That's a great question.
I feel like networks are even
Right.
within your
It's all
works
about the
as
network,
well.
right?
It's really reflected in these paintings, the layers, the networks. Yeah.
I don't think anything happens in the art world without community. So I have very few friends, and I'm sorry to say this, who aren't artists. And that community supports each other. We support each other emotionally, showing up at each other's events and shows, helping each other in the studio, critiquing the work. So an art community is super important. And again, back to economics. Like I had a grad class from another school come to my studio and they said, well, where do we go? What do we do? And I said, well, New York is hard, but there's a town in the Hudson Valley, north of New York, 2 hours. It's become another art hub. I said, you can go there because there's a lot of artists there and there's galleries there and you can find that community. You can't go to Philadelphia because it's not there, right? It's a city close to New York, but it doesn't have an art community. So I think that, I don't know what it says in your book about this, but you can't just call up a gallery and say, hey, represent me, it's other artists bring you in, collectors bring you in, other dealers bring you in, and that's from constant socializing, hanging out with, dining with situation. So I just think the community is essential,
Yeah. And if I may also follow up from that and talk about like the little bits in my book, one of the bigger lessons that I took from some of the interviews is how important it is to find your why within the sector. Why are you doing the work that you're doing? Why are you passionate about what you're passionate about? Because it helps you not only make the right decisions for your career path and what you decide to do with your creativity and within your career, but what it also does is it helps you find the people with that same ethos and with that same motivation. And that is something that can propel you forward because you're surrounded by those people who also understand your why. And I think that's a really powerful thing that I noticed when it came to actually building networks. And just a side note within the book, I also have a resource library in the back that gives like an actual list of networks that people can access that have been helpful to artists, art historians, people who work in restitution, people who work as art technicians, all of these different people, because they cite these things. They say like, oh, this network really helped or this resource really helped. And that could be the difference between someone deciding to pursue a career in that direction or not, is having access to that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I would also say fine-tuning it. Like, it's one thing to say, oh, I have a network of artists. More important, I have a network of female artists, and more important than that, I have a network of female artists who are mothers. So it's like what we know and what we navigate is specified down to, it's not like formal clubs, but it's like regular dinners, regular drinks, because we have a specific thing we need to navigate and share. So, yeah.
And that's also something I think, just pulling it back to your practice briefly, there's something about this engagement with surroundings and listening. And I don't really know how to put it into concrete words and phrases and how to describe how listening and responding and interacting is such an important thing on a practical level with someone's network or careers or friendship, but also kind of within these pieces, everything interacting with one another, responding, you telling the story of how, your assistant will put down the tape and you would react and respond to that. And there's sort of this push and pull of communication within your works, but also just thinking about how you pursue your practice in general. And I think that's why this is also such an interesting exhibition and these wonderful works to be surrounded by, because we really can feel that, and it's reflected in the conversation that we can have about life in general and about how we navigate these things.
Correct. Yeah.
I think I saw another question. Did you have a question? Yeah. A microphone's going to come your way. Sure, I could probably hear you from here, but...
Well, my question is, it's for both, but I know it's taken Alexandra like 5 years to write the book. What do you think is the biggest mistake that people make when they're trying to enter the art world? And maybe you had to do it again with no contact. What would you do?
I'd read my book.
Well, we like now that.
I think, honestly, I would like to speak from personal experience there and say one of the biggest mistakes that I made was chasing things like reputation and title, because you do get this feeling that reputation is so important in the art world. You must present yourself in a certain way. And of course I would like a reputation that says I'm professional and I'm good at what I do. But it ended up causing me to make decisions for, okay, a certain title at a gallery that I was employed at, and I chased that role because I wanted that title and I wanted to be that person, but it wasn't actually aligned with what my goals were. And so I was unhappy. And I think I was so focused on proving like I can make it, I can do this, I can have a job, that I ended up losing my way a little bit. And so I think what I probably, if I were to go back to me when I was younger, and I guess this is why I wrote the book, is because I would give me the book and I would just say, like, read these and see what actually fits. What do you actually enjoy doing? Because I think I pigeonholed myself a little bit. And I mean, I'm happy that I am where I am in my career because I'm now freelance and I have the podcast and the book and all of that. But there is just a level of, thinking about what other possibilities there are. And I think also in that same vein, when people are entering into the art world, I think that some people might think that because they're really extroverted, they'll be a really good salesperson. But that's not always true. Sometimes the best people who work in sales are the ones who listen, are the ones who are a little bit more introverted, aren't the ones who are, in front of everybody speaking with the microphone. Sometimes they're the ones that are a bit more discreet. And so thinking about the personality traits that you exhibit as a person and being really introspective and reflective, like reflecting on that, can also really help you. And I guess that's really with any career in any area, actually. But I think in the arts more so because it's such a personal industry. But I don't know, do you agree? Do you feel that that's kind of...
Well, is it a different question for me, or is it the same?
No, it's the same. What was the biggest mistake that you think people make?
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because most artists don't think of it initially as a career, right? It's this thing, this tick you've got to do. It's a way of expressing something that you can't do verbally, I think probably the biggest mistake is not understanding that it is a business.
It's a job.
Yeah, and so, and that, I think that's the hardest navigation at some point for an artist to realize that no matter how many good people are working for you on your behalf, you still have to think about that Instagram account and whatever. It's like it's ignoring or trying to fight that this is some kind of profession or business, and that you have to navigate that and you can't just ignore it. So I think that's probably the answer to the question.
That's why I think conversations like these are so important, because very rarely do we get to sit with an artist and ask an artist, hey, what does it mean when you actually work with an assistant in your studio?
Right.
Not that many people are super transparent about that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so happy that we can sit down and actually have this conversation. It's
Thank
very
you.
special.
Yeah.
I think we might have time for one more question, if anyone wants to.
I also remember the art world before 1980, before postmodern came in, and there was sort of the artists from the 50s when I didn't know them then. The 50s and the 60s and the early 70s had a real community, and they did support each other. If there was a show in a gallery and there was somebody wasn't very successful, and their successful friends all came and bought the work.
Yeah.
And there was, and there were places, like Max's Kansas City, the Cedar Bar, all these things.
Yeah.
It sort of disappeared. And I remember when the Odeon opened in
Tribeca.
Tribeca, yeah. And going there with an artist, and he was upset the table we got wasn't the same, somebody had got a better table. And this didn't exist before, and I think that one of the problems was in the early 80s, when Taubman bought Sotheby's, everything became money. And anybody who wants to go into this business must have passion, and they must be true to themselves. And all the mistakes, or most of the mistakes I've made in my life, in my business life, is thinking you'll make some money out of this. And there's no such thing as a free meal. And just be true to yourself.
Yeah.
And, life is much easier.
Yeah.
And I would never, till 1990, the biggest galleries were, well, Marlborough had a lot of people. Otherwise, all the galleries were less than 15 people.
That's why this is also, I must say, being in this gallery and it having been, it's been in existence for so long, and it actually is really meaningful to be a part of that, a gallery that has such a long history and will continue to have a long history. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add to what James said. It's, in fact, in the period you're talking about, the artists cared more about what the other artists thought of their work. Like when Philip Guston, if anyone knows who Philip Guston, when he changed his work, he was appalled that his friends were just talking badly about him and not coming to his openings. And so back to community, it was all about, what the other artists thought you were doing, whether the work was getting better or worse, right? That's not so, no one likes anyone not liking their work, but that's not so much the case anymore. And again, I circle back to the economics hasn't allowed it, and somehow the visibility of artists as being cool or whatever, I don't know, but the globalization of the whole thing has made it a lot more difficult. And there's a romance for me to the time that James is talking about, but there's also a romance of a telephone. So you can't go back. So
yeah, when kids
how do you
act like they're picking up the phone these days, it's like this instead of how we're used to it.
They know the circle. It was great. So yeah. So
in general, everybody, you could, if you wanted to get hold of an artist, they'd pick up the telephone.
Totally. Yeah.
Now, if you want to get hold of an artist, you're sort of grilled.
How did you guys get a hold of each other?
How did we meet?
Yeah, or how did this come to be?
But it is
Was it a telephone?
Trying to but you put through about 5 hoops, and the camaraderie is the sad thing that has gone.
Yeah.
And the dealers are too big now.
Mm-hmm.
You think that a handful of dealers that have 400 or 500 people working.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It just doesn't add up. That's a huge hunk of money that's got to be made to feed all these people.
Yeah.
It's true.
As sizable organizations that become these kind of Goliath kind of businesses, that indeed it does become about the money, and there is a lot less. I've been in the art world for only nearly 10 years now. It's not like I've had a really long time in this industry. And most of my experience in this industry has been in London, even though I'm American-Austrian. I've had a little bit more professional experience in Austria, but less so in America. But when you and I had our initial call with one another, you and I were talking about these differences between working and living in the US versus in London, the things that we notice. And I think, especially in the United States, but also in London, there is a level of this idea of individualism, and there's no more wanting to be a part of a community and wanting to have that sort of.
You have to fight for it.
Yeah, you also have to show up. If you want to be a part of that, you also have to show up as part of that. And I think, sometimes it can be quite hard to do. Yeah. But we try. Well,
did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, did you want to ask anything before?
Was about how you met with James.
Oh yeah, how did you and James meet?
Community. There was a collector that had bought my work, and I don't know how James met the collector, but she was enthusiastic about my work and shared that with James, and that's how we met. He took me a studio visit in New York, and we liked each other. We liked to have dinner together and laugh, and so, So it's, I think, right, James? Yeah, it's like, it's not like just like he liked my work. There was I think we felt a connection, and part of that connection was this belief of the way art should be handled and thought about and dealt with, like this principle that he's calling old school. But I just want to tell this quick story that one of my grad students took over my class, my undergraduate class, and just that young people still can try this. And she said to the class, okay, you're going to go to the Metropolitan Museum and find a painting, and I want you to sit there for an hour with the painting. And they were like, what? An hour? What are we going to do with the hour? So that's an old school, like how you really look at something, not on your phone, not quick, but that's a kind of principle of taking an artwork, revisiting. I went to see Seurat yesterday. I've seen Seurat 1,000 times. But, I think new things have new thoughts. It's, it unfolds. And I think that it's important, even though it seems far-fetched with the phone thing and looking at a painting for an hour, to at least still try to push that envelope, in that way.
Yeah, it's also about creative health and being able to strengthen our attention spans,
Definitely,
being able to be introspective. It's also, looking at art is proven to lower blood pressure. So, we're also doing something for our physical health, okay? But yeah, completely. Well, I guess I will draw it to a close. Thank you, everybody, so much for your wonderful questions, for listening to us speak, and thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Mayor Gallery for hosting us this evening.